Tears rolled down their faces as the door shut, and the bus drove off without them. 8-year-old Emma clutched her brother's hand, their matching wheelchairs gleaming under the harsh afternoon sun. The diesel fumes from the departing community transport bus mixed with the smell of hot asphalt, creating a suffocating cloud that seemed to mirror the weight pressing down on their small chests. "Why did the mean lady make us get off?" "Ethan!" Emma's voice cracked, her words barely audible over the hum of air conditioners from the nearby apartment complex. Her twin brother, identical in every way except for the stubborn cowlick that refused to lie flat, no matter how much their mother tried to tame it, squeezed her fingers with what little strength his muscles could muster. "I don't know. But Mom will be here soon. She always comes." Ethan's voice carried the false bravery that only an 8-year-old could muster when trying to comfort his sister, even though his own chin trembled with the effort of holding back tears. The Willowbrook Community Transport had been their lifeline for 3 months now. Every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 2:15, the small white bus with its hydraulic wheelchair lift would arrive at the corner of Maple and 3rd Street, where the twins waited with their aide, Mrs. Rodriguez. The journey to St. Mary's Children's Therapy Center took 23 minutes, a route Emma had memorized by counting the number of red traffic lights and the distinctive blue house with the spinning garden windmill. Today should have been no different. The twins had been ready 15 minutes early, as always, their matching therapy bags packed with the special grip strengtheners Dr. Patterson had recommended. Emma had even brought her favorite book, the one about the brave princess who saved her kingdom despite being different from everyone else. The story always made her feel stronger, more capable of facing the world that seemed determined to remind her of her limitations. Muscular dystrophy was a big word for such small bodies to carry. The Duchenne variant. Dr. Patterson had explained to their parents in words that sounded like medical thunder, meant that the twins' muscles would gradually weaken over time. But at 8 years old, they were still mobile, still able to transfer from their wheelchairs to the bus seats with minimal assistance, still able to dream of futures that stretched beyond the boundaries of their condition. Their mother, Sarah Chen, had fought for months to get the twins approved for the community transport program. The regular school buses weren't equipped with proper lifts, and their family's 15-year-old Honda couldn't accommodate 2 wheelchairs and still have room for their medical equipment. The community transport had been a godsend, a bridge between their small apartment and the therapy sessions that kept their muscles as strong as possible for as long as possible. Mrs. Rodriguez had been running late today, caught in traffic from a doctor's appointment that had run over. She'd called Sarah, who'd assured her that the twins could wait the extra 10 minutes alone. They'd done it before. And, at 8 years old, they were responsible enough to stay put on the corner until either the bus or Mrs. Rodriguez arrived. What they hadn't expected was Karen Whitmore. Karen emerged from the Willowbrook Homeowners Association office like a storm cloud given human form. At 52, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who'd appointed herself guardian of community standards. Her steel gray hair pulled back in a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her already sharp features. Her clipboard, never far from her side, contained a running list of infractions she'd observed throughout the neighborhood grass that grew a quarter-inch too high, mailboxes that weren't regulation height, and children who dared to play too loudly in the designated quiet hours. She'd been HOA president for 7 years, elected by a margin of 3 votes in an election where only 12 residents bothered to participate. Her campaign had focused on property values and maintaining the character of the neighborhood, code words that everyone understood, but nobody wanted to say aloud. Under her leadership, the community had implemented new rules about decorative displays, noise ordinances, and guest parking restrictions that had driven away more than one young family. "Excuse me." Karen's voice cut through the afternoon air like a blade. She approached the twins with the measured stride of someone used to being obeyed without question. "You children don't live in this immediate area. I've never seen you before." Emma looked up from her book, her dark eyes wide with confusion. "We're waiting for the bus, ma'am. The community transport bus." "That bus is for residents of Willowbrook community only. Are your parents members of this HOA?" Karen's tone carried the weight of authority she'd cultivated over years of board meetings and neighborhood disputes. "We live on Elm Street," Ethan said, his voice smaller than his sister's but still steady. "Our mom pays for the bus. She has a card." Karen's expression hardened. She'd been dealing with what she called service abuse for months. Convinced that people from outside the community were taking advantage of resources meant for paying HOA members. The fact that these children were in wheelchairs only reinforced her belief that they were exploiting the system's sympathy. "Elm Street is outside our district boundaries. This bus service is funded by HOA dues, not charity cases." Her words hit the twins like physical blows, each syllable designed to make them feel small and unwelcome. The community transport bus rounded the corner at exactly 2:15. Its familiar rumble a sound that usually brought relief and anticipation. Today, it carried a different weight. Marcus Johnson, the driver, had been operating the route for 2 years. He knew every regular passenger by name, knew their stories, their struggles, their small victories. He'd watched the Chen twins grow more confident over the months, had celebrated with them when Emma finally mastered transferring from her wheelchair to the bus seat independently. Marcus parked the bus and began lowering the hydraulic lift, the mechanical whir of familiar song in the afternoon routine. But before he could open the door, Karen strode toward the vehicle with purpose. "Driver, these children are not authorized to use this service. They're from outside our community boundaries." Marcus looked through the windshield at the twins, who sat in their wheelchairs with expressions of growing bewilderment. He'd transported them dozens of times, had their mother's authorization forms in his file, knew they were legitimate passengers. "Ma'am, Emma and Ethan Chen are on my approved passenger list. They've been riding twice a week for 3 months." "Well, I'm Karen Whitmore, HOA president, and I'm telling you, they're not authorized. These children are slow and wasting gas, making the route longer for everyone else. They don't belong here." The words hung in the air like poison. Slow and wasting gas. The twins heard every syllable, felt the weight of each word settle into their chest like stones. Emma's book slipped from her hands, pages fluttering in the breeze that carried the scent of jasmine from the nearby garden. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. In his 2 years of driving community transport, he'd never encountered such blatant discrimination. He'd seen plenty of impatience from passengers, occasional complaints about schedules, but nothing like this raw hatred disguised as policy enforcement. "Mrs. Whitmore, these children have every right to use this service. Their mother pays the fees, and they're registered passengers." "Not anymore. As HOA president, I'm revoking their access effective immediately. And if you don't drive away right now, I'll have your supervisor revoke your route authorization." Karen's threat carried weight that Marcus couldn't ignore. His supervisor, Janet Reeves, had made it clear that community transport drivers needed to maintain positive relationships with the HOAs they served. Complaints from HOA presidents could result in route changes, reduced hours, or even termination. Marcus had a family to support, a mortgage to pay, and bills that wouldn't wait for justice to sort itself out. But looking at the twins, seeing the way Emma's shoulders shook with silent sobs, and the way Ethan tried to make himself smaller in his wheelchair, Marcus made a choice that would haunt him for weeks. "Kids, I'm sorry. I have to follow HOA directives. You'll need to find another way to get to therapy today." The hydraulic lift groaned as it folded back into the bus. The door closed with a soft hiss that sounded like a sigh of defeat. Marcus didn't look back as he drove away, but his hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles went white. Karen watched the bus disappear around the corner, satisfaction radiating from her rigid posture. Let this be a lesson. Community resources are for community members. Maybe your parents will think twice before trying to cheat the system again. She turned on her heel and walked back toward the HOA office, her clipboard tucked under her arm like a shield. Behind her, the twins sat in stunned silence, the weight of abandonment settling around them like a shroud. Ethan was the first to move, wheeling his chair closer to his sister's. "Em, we need to call Mom." Emma nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Their mother had given them a basic cell phone for emergencies, a simple device that could call 3 numbers home: Mom's work, and Uncle David. Uncle David. The twins didn't know much about their uncle, except that he worked for the government and always sent them elaborate birthday presents. He'd moved to the state capital 3 years ago for a job that Mom described as very important. But he still visited for holidays and special occasions. His business cards, which Emma liked to collect, said David Chen, Chairman, State Transportation Authority. But she didn't understand what that meant. The call to their mother went straight to voicemail. Sarah worked as a medical technician at the county hospital, and afternoon shifts often meant being unavailable for hours at a time. The twins left a message, Emma's voice breaking as she tried to explain what had happened. 15 minutes later, Mrs. Rodriguez arrived in her battered sedan, her face flushed with worry and exertion. She'd gotten the twins' message and broken several speed limits getting to them. "Mijos, what happened? Where's the bus?" Through tears and interrupted sentences, the twins told their story. Mrs. Rodriguez listened with growing fury, her hands clenching and unclenching as she processed the cruelty of what had transpired. That woman had no right at all. She helped the twins into her car, their wheelchairs folded and loaded into the trunk with practiced efficiency. "We're going to therapy, and then we're going to make sure this never happens again." But Mrs. Rodriguez, despite her righteous anger, was just a part-time aide with no connections to the community transport system. Her complaints to the HOA office were dismissed with form letters and bureaucratic language. Her calls to the transport company were transferred from department to department until she gave up in frustration. The twins missed their next 3 therapy appointments. Sarah tried to rearrange her work schedule, but the hospital's staffing shortages made it impossible. She borrowed money from her sister to pay for taxi rides, but the cost was unsustainable for a single mother already stretched thin by medical expenses. Karen, meanwhile, had moved on to her next target. She'd received reports of teenagers skateboarding on community sidewalks after hours, and she threw herself into documenting this new violation with the same fervor she'd shown in excluding the twins. In her mind, she was protecting the community from undesirable elements, maintaining the standards that kept property values high and residents safe. The community transport continued its routes without Emma and Ethan, but the other passengers noticed their absence. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who'd grown fond of the twins' cheerful chatter, asked Marcus what had happened to those sweet children. He told her only that they were no longer authorized passengers, but his discomfort was obvious. Word spread through the small community of regular passengers. Stories were shared, theories proposed, and, gradually, the truth emerged. Karen's actions had been witnessed by residents who lived near the bus stop, and her comments about the twins being slow and wasting gas had been overheard by multiple people. The community began to divide. Some residents supported Karen's strict interpretation of HOA rules, arguing that resources should be reserved for paying members. Others were horrified by the treatment of disabled children, regardless of their technical eligibility. The debate played out in community forums, neighborhood social media groups, and heated conversations at the local grocery store. Through it all, the twins tried to maintain their therapy routine. Sarah drove them when she could. Mrs. Rodriguez filled in when possible, and they missed sessions when neither option was available. Emma's strength began to decline first, her grip on pencils becoming more tenuous, her ability to transfer from wheelchair to bed requiring more assistance. Ethan followed close behind, his breathing becoming more labored during the mild exercises Dr. Patterson had prescribed. Dr. Patterson called Sarah after the third missed appointment. "I'm concerned about Emma and Ethan's progress. Consistency is crucial at this stage of their condition. If they can't maintain regular therapy, we're going to see accelerated muscle deterioration." Sarah broke down on the phone, the stress of the past 3 weeks finally overwhelming her carefully maintained composure. She told Dr. Patterson about the bus incident, about Karen's cruelty, about the impossibility of finding alternative transportation. Dr. Patterson listened with growing concern. He'd been treating children with muscular dystrophy for 15 years, and he'd seen how transportation barriers could accelerate decline. "Sarah, there has to be something we can do. Have you contacted the State Transportation Authority? They oversee community transport programs." Sarah paused, a memory stirring. "My brother works for the State Transportation Authority. He's pretty high up. I think maybe he could help." That evening, Sarah called David for the first time in 3 months. They'd grown apart after their parents' deaths, their relationship strained by distance and the demands of their respective lives. But family was family, and David had always been protective of his sister and her children. David listened to Sarah's story with growing disbelief. As chairman of the State Transportation Authority, he oversaw community transport programs across the state. He knew the regulations, the funding structures, the legal requirements. What Karen had done wasn't just cruel, it was illegal. "Sarah, I need you to write down everything that happened. Every word that woman said, every action she took. I'm going to look into this personally." David's investigation began the next morning. He pulled the Willowbrook Community Transport files, reviewed the passenger manifests, and examined the funding agreements. The community transport program was funded by a combination of state grants, federal disability services funding, and local matching funds. HOA dues provided less than 15% of the total budget, and the service was legally required to be available to all residents within a 5-mile radius, regardless of HOA membership. More damning was the discovery that Karen had been falsifying reports to increase the community's funding allocation. She'd been claiming higher ridership numbers and more disabled passengers than actually used the service, inflating the federal disability services portion of their grant. The Chen twins' exclusion wasn't just discrimination, it was fraud. David's next call was to the State Attorney General's office, his friend from law school, now a prosecutor specializing in public corruption. Listened to the case with interest. "David, this is bigger than one HOA president's bad behavior. If she's been falsifying federal funding documents, we're talking about serious criminal charges." The investigation expanded rapidly. Federal auditors arrived at the Willowbrook HOA office, demanding documentation going back 3 years. Transportation Authority inspectors began unannounced visits to community transport routes. The state's disability rights advocate opened a formal complaint process. Karen remained oblivious to the gathering storm. She'd moved on to her next crusade, a campaign to restrict visitor parking that she was convinced would improve neighborhood security. Her days were filled with meetings, phone calls, and the satisfaction of imposing order on what she saw as chaos. The surprise inspection came on a Thursday afternoon. David arrived at the Willowbrook HOA office in an unmarked state vehicle, accompanied by two Transportation Authority investigators and a federal auditor. They walked into the office without announcement, their official identification badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Mrs. Karen Whitmore, I'm David Chen, Chairman of the State Transportation Authority. We need to discuss your community transport program. The color drained from Karen's face. She recognized the name immediately. It was the same as those children she'd had removed from the bus 3 weeks ago. I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. I was protecting community resources. Mrs. Whitmore, you illegally denied service to passengers who were fully authorized and legally entitled to use community transport. You also falsified federal funding documents, claiming reimbursement for services you then refused to provide. The federal auditor stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority. Mrs. Whitmore, you're looking at charges of civil rights violations, fraud, and misappropriation of federal funds. The total amount of improperly claimed funding over the past 3 years exceeds $50,000. Karen's world collapsed around her. She tried to argue that she'd been protecting the community, maintaining standards, preventing abuse of the system. But her words fell on ears that had already heard the recorded conversations, seen the falsified documents, and witnessed the impact of her actions on 2 8-year-old children. The story broke in the local news that evening. HOA president charged with fraud and disability discrimination case. The details spread through social media, picked up by disability rights organizations, and eventually reached national attention as an example of how discrimination against disabled individuals persisted even in seemingly progressive communities. The emergency HOA board meeting was called for the following Saturday. The community center was packed with residents who'd never shown interest in association business before. Karen sat at the head table, her usual confidence replaced by a pale, drawn expression that made her look older than her 52 years. David attended the meeting as a private citizen, his official capacity set aside for personal advocacy. He sat in the front row, his presence a reminder of the wider implications of the community's actions. One by one, residents stood to speak. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who'd missed seeing the twins on the bus, spoke about the joy the children had brought to her weekly trips. They always asked about my grandchildren, always offered to help if I dropped something. Emma would read to me from her book sometimes. They were the best part of my week. Marcus Johnson, the bus driver, spoke about the pressure he'd felt to comply with Karen's demands. I knew it was wrong, but I was scared of losing my job. I've been driving for 20 years, and I've never done anything I was more ashamed of. Those kids deserved better from all of us. Dr. Patterson attended via video call, his medical expertise adding weight to the discussion. Emma and Ethan's condition requires consistent therapeutic intervention. The 3-week gap in their treatment has already resulted in measurable decline. This isn't just about transportation. It's about these children's quality of life and long-term prognosis. Sarah spoke last, her voice steady despite the emotion in her words. My children have never asked for special treatment. They just want to be kids who happen to need wheelchairs. They want to go to therapy so they can stay strong enough to play with their friends, to go to school, to have dreams about their futures. Mrs. Whitmore didn't just deny them a bus ride, she tried to deny them hope. Karen's defense was weak and increasingly desperate. She spoke about property values, about the need to maintain community standards, about the importance of protecting resources for paying members. But her words rang hollow in the face of the evidence presented against her. The vote was unanimous. Karen Whitmore was removed from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. The board voted to issue a public apology to the Chen family and to implement new policies, ensuring that community transport access would never again be denied based on discrimination. But the legal consequences were just beginning. The federal charges moved forward, and Karen found herself facing prosecution for civil rights violations and fraud. Her legal fees mounted as she tried to defend actions that were increasingly indefensible. The stress took its toll on her health, her relationships, and her standing in the community she'd tried so hard to protect. The civil lawsuit filed by the Chen family's attorney was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. Karen's homeowner's insurance refused to cover the settlement, arguing that discriminatory actions weren't covered under the policy. She was forced to sell her house, the property values she'd worked so hard to protect becoming irrelevant as her own financial situation crumbled. Emma and Ethan returned to their regular therapy schedule within a week of the HOA meeting. The community transport service was expanded, with additional routes and improved accessibility features funded by the settlement money. Marcus Johnson received additional training in disability rights and advocacy, becoming a champion for passenger rights throughout the system. The twins' strength gradually returned to baseline levels, their spirits lifted by the support they'd received from unexpected allies. Emma's favorite book took on new meaning. She truly was a brave princess who'd saved her kingdom, not through magical powers, but through the simple act of standing up for what was right. Dr. Patterson noted the improvement in his treatment notes. Emma and Ethan have shown remarkable resilience throughout this ordeal. Their physical progress has resumed, but more importantly, their psychological well-being has actually improved. They've learned that they have advocates, that their community will stand up for them when they need it most. David's relationship with his sister grew stronger through the crisis. He made an effort to visit more often, to be more present in the twins' lives. At their 9th birthday party, he brought them matching t-shirts that read, "Justice Rolls On," a gentle reminder of how they'd helped change their community for the better. Karen's criminal trial took place 6 months later. She was convicted on 3 counts of fraud and 2 counts of civil rights violations. The judge's sentence included 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service specifically with disability advocacy organizations, and a lifetime ban from holding positions of authority over public transportation services. In his sentencing remarks, the judge noted the broader implications of the case. This case represents more than individual wrongdoing. It highlights the responsibility we all have to protect the most vulnerable members of our communities. Mrs. Whitmore's actions were not just illegal. They were a betrayal of the basic human dignity that should be extended to all citizens, regardless of their abilities or circumstances. The Willowbrook community transformed in the aftermath of the scandal. New leadership emerged, focused on inclusion and accessibility rather than exclusion and control. The community center was renovated to improve wheelchair access. The playground was expanded with adaptive equipment, and the annual community festival added a disability awareness component. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd been there when the twins needed her most, was hired by the State Transportation Authority to serve as a disability advocate and trainer. Her first assignment was developing a program to educate community leaders about accessibility rights and requirements. 3 years later, Emma and Ethan were thriving in their new school, their regular therapy sessions having maintained their mobility and strength. Emma had become an advocate for other children with disabilities, writing letters to local newspapers and speaking at community events. Ethan had discovered a talent for drawing, his artwork depicting scenes of children of all abilities playing together. The community transport bus still stopped at the corner of Maple and 3rd Street every Tuesday and Thursday at 2:15. But now, it carried a diverse group of passengers, elderly residents, children with disabilities, and community members who'd learned that true strength came from supporting each other rather than excluding those who were different. David often thought about the afternoon phone call from his sister that had changed everything. He'd been in his office, reviewing budget reports and planning committee meetings, when her voice had cracked through the phone line. "David, I need help. Someone hurt my children." Those words had awakened something in him, not just the protective instincts of an uncle, but the moral obligation of someone with the power to create change. He'd learned that justice wasn't just about laws and regulations, but about standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. The case had national impact, leading to strengthened federal oversight of community transport programs and new training requirements for HOA board members who oversaw public services. Karen's name became synonymous with the dangers of unchecked discrimination, a cautionary tale taught in civil rights courses and community leadership programs. But for Emma and Ethan, the story was simpler. They'd learned that the world could be cruel, but it could also be kind. They'd discovered that justice might take time, but it would eventually roll forward like their bus, steady and reliable, picking up everyone who needed a ride. On quiet afternoons, when the twins sat at their therapy sessions, working to maintain their strength, they sometimes talked about that day when they'd been left behind. The memory no longer carried the sharp pain of abandonment, but rather the warm glow of a community that had rallied around them. "Do you think Mrs. Whitmore learned anything?" Emma asked one day, her hands working the grip strengtheners with practiced precision. Ethan considered the question seriously, as he did all of his sister's deep thoughts. "I think she learned that being mean doesn't make you strong, and that families stick together, even when they're far apart." Emma smiled, thinking of Uncle David and his promise to always be there when they needed him. "I think she learned that justice rolls on, no matter how hard people try to stop it." Outside the therapy center, the familiar rumble of the community transport bus could be heard approaching its next stop. Marcus waved as he passed, his route schedule perfectly timed to ensure that every passenger who needed a ride would get one. The hydraulic lift was ready, the doors were open, and justice kept rolling forward, one passenger at a time. The sun was setting over Willowbrook as the twins finished their therapy session, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility. Their mother waited in the parking lot, her smile reflecting the peace that had settled over their family since the ordeal ended. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as it always did, but they would face them together, supported by a community that had learned the true meaning of strength. In the end, Karen Whitmore had been right about one thing. Actions did have consequences. But she'd learned too late that the consequences of cruelty and discrimination were far more devastating than the imagined threats she'd tried so hard to prevent. The community she'd thought she was protecting had ultimately protected itself from her, choosing inclusion over exclusion, compassion over cruelty, and justice over prejudice. The bus route continued, day after day, carrying passengers to their destinations with dignity and respect. And, somewhere in the distance, the sound of children's laughter could be heard, a reminder that the future belonged to those who believed in the possibility of a better world, one where everyone had a seat at the table and a place in the community they called home.